Now, the next thing you need is related to imagery. Basically an eye for detail, which you need to look for small and subtle features. And I'll explain what those mean. And you should be just looking for this generally as one of the things in the world, is that you don't just look at a room and say that's a room. You look at it as lots and lots of little pieces that make up a room. Let me explain. If I was to describe someone's bedroom to you and say, well, it's his bedroom, there are lots of things in that person's bedroom. There would be their bed. There would be the curtains, there would be the shelves, the wardrobe, all those different things in there. And then there'll be other things. And then if I wanted to describe the state of that bedroom, whether it was immaculately clean, so I'd describe the floor and perhaps how clean everything is, or if I'm to say he's lazy, then I'd say there's clothes all over the floor, food left over which isn't in the bin, all those sorts of things. It's about going into the smaller features which give us a lot more of an indication about what something's like than what the bigger features do. If I just say it's someone's bedroom, then I'm immediately imagining my bedroom and not his. Whereas if I start giving other sorts of details about what makes that room special, even if they're only small and subtle things, then really what I'm doing is describing his rather than just describing a bedroom in general. So look for those smallish sorts of details, even if it's just scratches and dust and different things like that. Those sorts of details really help to bring something to life. And it sort of reminds you of the things that you would notice if you've spent enough time in one place. And particularly if you're trying to narrate from the perspective of someone who spends a lot of their time in their bedroom, they just say, oh, yeah, it's my bedroom, there's nothing special about it. There's something special in everyone's bedroom, and if you were to go into it in detail, then of course you'll be able to find different things. You spend enough time in there, so you should be able to find at least something out of it. I mean, these features are more effective if they bring a story to life. They contain a story within themselves. If you were to describe something and you'll describe maybe a mark on the curtain, you could describe the story behind how that mark got there, and that it was based on a summer's day and messing around and things happen and mark on curtain, etc. Really, that bringing it to life aspect is something that we all do, and especially as we all tell stories about things. And if someone asks you a question, well, how did that get there? Then you can tell a story about it, and that can be something that adds another layer, another dimension to what you're writing. Again, another example, crisscross the scratches on his skin from when he picked the fight with a rose bush. Okay, some small details like that sort of describe not only a little bit about that person, but also a little bit about the nature of that person, and that when he picked the fight with a rose bush, okay, yeah, it's being a little clever and saying that it's sort of exaggerating a little bit, but also might say that he's perhaps a bit clumsy, that the fact that having scratches all over his skin from a rose bush means that he either fell into it or deliberately threw himself. I would say most likely the former, and so to have those scratches would say that he's fallen into it, he's an active person who sometimes falls over, sometimes does stupid things like go head first in the rose bushes, or arm first at least anyway. Those sorts of descriptions again can tell you a lot more than just saying he was a clumsy person, because that doesn't really tell us anything. But if we tell us that sort of thing, then that also tells us the same thing and gives us detail to sort of bring it to life and make us feel like, oh yeah, I've done that before, and I think everyone's done that at some point. Okay, so what we're going to look at next, we're going to look at perspective and power. Now, perspective and power is something you need to have a reference to in your story. And this, when I refer to this, and one of the things I also refer to here is conflict. Now, all stories that you will be writing will have some sort of conflict in them. As a story about conflict, you need to sort of indicate, okay, who has the upper hand, who has the power in the story, and who's doing what to whom. The relationships between people and how you're able to talk about them. Now, a lot of the stories that I read, or there have been some stories, should I say, that I've read, where this isn't necessarily clear, and that there are situations where there's no real indication about where the conflict occurs, that there's indications about, well, they sort of had this fight, but there's nothing really to say who is right, who is wrong, it just describes it and then doesn't really go anywhere with it. In order to give perspective, and particularly if you're looking at something heavy to do with theme and to write a story based on the theme, then you need to be able to include perspectives in there. And also this idea of power and who and where they feel in relation to that idea. So if it's about, for instance, belonging, for those of you who are doing it, be looking at, okay, do they have it or do they not have it? Do they have the power to say, yes, I do have a sense of belonging, or do they not? Really what that indicates is that one person has essentially a grasp over their own identity, their own destiny, whatever it may be. So you need to have some sort of reference to essentially who's the strongest. And it's, again, pretty much the same way that you would use a camera and looking at it from a film perspective. You position them. All right, and I'll explain what I mean by this word positioning. Standing and sitting, but we'll go into a little bit more detail in that you can, through your description, show that one person's stronger and one person's weaker, without necessarily even having to use the word strong and one's weak. An example of that is standing and sitting, which is that the strongest person stands up. So if I'm trying to intimidate someone, if I'm trying to intimidate a small child, for instance, which I may want to do, should I ever decide that I want to do that, then one of the things that I can use to do that is looking down on them. If you imagine, if you're someone who's very small looking up at someone very tall, there's obviously that fear that comes from that. If you're looking at someone straight in the eye and they're not looking back, again, that sort of shows that as well. There are a number of different interactions between people who shows which one's a dominant person and which one is submissive or hasn't got quite the same level of dominance as the other person does. And it helps to sort of establish these relationships without having to say that he's the leader and he's not. And that's the other thing as well, which you can really get from this, is being able to describe something without saying he's the boss, he's not the boss. You can actually just show it. You don't even need to tell us who's in charge or who's not. So it's very important that you write your characters and put them together in such a way, or even just organize your events so you can show who has power and who doesn't. And as I said, it's something that you'll see employed quite a lot in film. It's something that's quite equally effective, and especially the way you describe it. So, like you could see from that image as well, you can see who has power, the one who's standing over the other one who has their shoulders hunched and looking away, looking at the ground. All those things you can see from that, just that image and the way you would describe that image, that one has power and one doesn't. I also mentioned that example before. This example, the eyes, dominant person will look in someone's eyes, less dominant will look away. So there's the other example as well.